Good morning and a warm welcome to all of you who have joined today's session. As we wait for people to join in, let's get started with the initial introductions to the webinar. Today's topic is delivering business agility without estimation, brought to you by Swift Kanban from Digite. Agenda for the session today, we'll start with the usual introductions and then a quick introduction to Digite and Swift Kanban for those of you who may not know us. And then I'll hand over the session to Sudipta Lairi for the main session today, delivering business agility without estimation. And then at the end of it, we'll have a Q&A session. And I hope that we will have given you enough to relate to and to ask questions in the context of your work and have a lively discussion towards the end of the webinar. Just some housekeeping. We are recording the webinar, and the recording will be made available after the webinar in a follow-up email. We will take questions on the Q&A using the questions box that's on the panel of the GoToWebinar, which should be on your right side of the screen. And feel free to ask questions at any time. We'll try and take as many of them as possible, may perhaps during the webinar, but certainly at the end of the webinar. So you don't need to take notes. We will have the recordings available. So with that, let me introduce our main speaker, Sudipta Lairi. Sudipta is Head of Engineering and Products at Digite and also a experienced agilist. My name is Mahesh Singh, and I'm a co-founder and Senior Vice President of Marketing at Digite. And I'm also quite involved with our Lean-Agile implementations that we do with our customers. Little bit more about Sudipta, or Sudi as I know him, has been in the IT industry for over 3 decades. And like I said, in Digite, he runs the engineering and product functions. And also very, very passionate agilist. He works closely with pretty much most of our customers in terms of implementing or helping them implement their agile initiatives and coaching and training them in their journey, as well as, of course, helping in terms of implementing our products. And before joining Digite, Sudi held a variety of different roles, both in project delivery as well as in business development, and so has a really good grasp of challenges that IT organizations see worldwide, and how to help them resolve those challenges and sort of improve on a continuous basis. Sudi and I had so this topic in particular is I think close to heart for both Sudi and I. I think we have in our past lives spent enough time on large projects for global organizations where we spent a fair bit of time in estimating and coming up with project plans that we try to then live by as we try to deliver those projects. So this one in particular, I think, is close to our heart, and I'm all waiting to sort of see what Sudi has to say, and then hope to have a good discussion with him after the session is over. Just before I hand over to Sudipta, just a quick introduction about Digite. We have been a pioneer in the web-based collaborative products and solutions for distributed teams, specifically in the space of agile application lifecycle management, project and program management, and in general, any kind of business function delivery. We have nearly 1 million users of our products around the world. And like I said, we focus on these specific domains. Swift Kanban and Swift Ease are our 2 specific offerings for lean and agile teams that are looking for tooling to accelerate their lean agile initiatives. Just a quick look at some of our customers. You'll probably notice a few names that you'll recognize. We have customers that range from maybe a few teams to tens of thousands of people, and we have some very large implementations of some of our products. And at the same time, we are able to help very small teams also get started very quickly and effectively using our products. So we are able to help you. If you're looking for tooling help in your company or in your context, do take a look at our website and get in touch with us. So with that, let me hand over to Sudi. Sudi, all yours.
Hey Mahesh, thanks. So tell me if you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's get started, folks. And it is a topic, like Mahesh said, that we have often discussed internally very passionately in terms of estimation, how much we should estimate and how much time we should spend on estimation, and if estimation is the source of many of our issues that we actually face today. So what I'm going to do today is spend a little the first few slides in setting the context with reference to business agility, because the focus of this webinar series is to help understand how help business leaders understand how can we actually deliver agility without doing a lot of the things that they used to do for many decades together.
Hey,
And
Suyukta, let me interrupt you for a quick second. Your camera is off for whatever reason. Um,
sorry about that.
okay, you're back on.
So, and you can see my slide, right?
Yes.
Awesome. So, and one of the things that obviously they used to do for many decades is long detailed estimates to be able to plan and track their projects, and that's exactly what we'll try and understand how to nail that problem today. Now, business agility in simple terms is the ability of an organization to respond to change. And the term rapidly is extremely important because in today's terms, competition and with technology evolving so fast, if you lose the market time, you are essentially lost an opportunity. So the ability to rapidly respond to change becomes extremely critical. And now, when we come to the whole Lean Agile community, uh, we talk about few things which is pretty dear to us, but which is extremely contradictory to what our business leaders who are in their 40s and 50s have done for the last 3-4 decades. And if you're hearing me repeat this from the last webinar, it indeed is a repeat for people who were present in the last webinar, because it was important for me to set the context as I go forward and move deeper into the subject itself. The fact is that that we essentially talk about many things which is extremely contrary to what all organizations and teams and leaders used to do for all this time. And so when you tell them that, hey, detailed planning is, wasteful, detailed estimation is wasteful, don't do it, multitasking is a bad thing, tracking utilization is a bad thing, the most common reaction that they give at the bottom of your heart is really, are you going to tell me that all the things that has made me successful so far, I have to throw it out of the window and adopt what you guys are telling me I should be running my projects? And it just doesn't work, because they've had their success and their deep-rooted conviction in the processes and the methods and the techniques they have practiced for so many years. So it becomes important to be able to articulate what we are espousing for in a language that they can relate to. And if you cannot explicitly build that connection, then essentially what you'll end up doing is people hearing you out, but at the bottom of their mind, they're very clear that this is just not for us. This is not what we're going to do. I'm not convinced on this. So this webinar series is essentially designed to unravel some of these weird things, so-called weird things that we talk about, and put it in the context so that business leaders can understand why we are saying what we are saying. And the first starting point of this is the kind of applications that we build today. Most of the processes and the applications that have been around for the last 50-60 years, since I would say 1950s and 60s, are actually derived for applications that were built in the 90s and 50s to 70s, 80s. It wasn't really till late 80s that GUI applications even came to the front of the technology world. So all these kind of applications were well suited for a very big bang development approach, because you really can't go much wrong in this kind of specification, right? You can only do a few things. You can only tab across from one place to another, and that's all you could do. A modern day application is extremely a different cup of tea. It's not just one application, it's a combination of multiple applications all on one page, interacting with one another, keeping in context of the data that has been filled in from one system to another. So if you're looking for hotels, it should be knowing that what's the flight tickets that you have been booking. So it should have all that context. And imagine that any product owner or product manager or even the end user can sit in a world and in a room and spec this application out to the T with all business logic, screen navigation, patterns. So what is how the UI interaction, UX interaction should be. It's just an unrealistic expectation. So the crux of the matter is that these kind of applications, the modern day applications, you really need to, and you have an idea, but you really need to go to the market very fast and get a validation done about what you believe your idea is. And how do you do that? You can only do it rapidly if you work with small and independent work requirements for small and independent work items. And why do I say that? Because obviously if it is large, it will take time. And if it is dependent, if these work items are dependent on one another, then you will again not be able to take them out of the door, because you are essentially going to be stuck in system testing until all of these come together, and you can then do a whole system testing iteration, multiple iterations of that, validate it, and then ship it out. So we really want to deliver it fast. You need to work in terms of small, independent, testable work items that deliver business value, so that people will be willing to give you feedback, and without specifically saying, must be of a high quality, so that they don't believe that they are doing your testing at their time and expense. So this is a very fundamental assumption, that the whole Lean Agile community does not really spend time in explaining to the business leaders that why is the big bang way of working not a solution anymore. It's not a solution anymore because you just can't sit in one room and spec it out in one document and expect that this is exactly what the market needs and what my end user is expecting. If you start with that premise, you're going to fail. You're going to go into extended user acceptance cycles that we all are very familiar with, and you're going to lose a lot of time and money and cause frustration to everybody. So we covered this topic in the previous webinar of how to generate small, independent, testable work items in a fair amount of detail. And I'm not going to actually talk about that anymore, but I wanted to put that in context. So with that in context, now let's talk about estimation. So let's understand how were estimates used in the last 3, 4 or the 5, 6 decades that I was referring to. So obviously the project goes through some key phases, and there used to be something called as an estimation basis, and the estimation basis used to be essentially used or be a process part of 3 key use cases. The first one being when the application was getting ideated or conceptualized, so that you can get an ROI calculation done. Then a second stage, it would be for once it is scoped out, and let's say something like a project charter statement is prepared, you would actually go ahead and create an estimate of how many person months you would need. And at the end of the project completion, it used to feed back into this estimation basis, so that if there are new learnings, it would work well for you. You would then be able to take the learnings from the first project, feed it into the next project, and so on and so forth. Great intent, but here's what used to happen. So if a developer felt that I need a person month to get this piece of work done, they would quote 1.15 person months. They'll keep some buffer and do it. It would go to the lead, and the lead will quote to the project manager and say it's going to take 1.3 person months. And the project manager will take that, and they will quote to the sales or the accounts person or whosoever is the intermediary in this case, 1.5 person month. The 1.5 person month, the business guy will put his margin on top of it, And by the time it will go to the customer, it would be sitting at 2% month. But guess what? The customer has an idea. Obviously, they are not completely naive, so they know that this is just not reasonable. So a bang happens there at that point of time, and he's going to hammer you down and say, forget it, I'm just going to pay you for 1.5% month. And this makes all the way back. The unfortunate thing is that the original developer only gets 0.75% month. Now guess what is going to do the next time this 1% month work comes? He's not going to quote you for 1% month. He's going to quote you that it's going to take you 1.25% month. And this whole cycle again repeats itself, and another explosion happens when the originally 1% month goes to the customer with a 2.5% month estimate. And this has been happening in the industry for decades and decades together. Everybody plays this game. Everybody is aware that it happens, and yet it continues to happen as if this is business as normal. And really speaking, there is no winner in this process, because the guy, every side feels shortchanged because what they wanted, they are not able to get. So it's just a completely vicious cycle that is set up for failure right from the day one that you begin the project planning. The second problem is obviously, how does the guy estimate whether it's going to take a person month? Because there are so many factors at that point of time which he or she has no clue of. So you're asking him to give an estimate. He doesn't know the skills. He doesn't know what kind of people I'm going to get, whether I'm even going to get all the people or not. What kind of uncertainty do I have with the requirements? So all these things are uncertain, yet we want them to go ahead and give us one magical number that how much time it's going to take. And the third one, which is my favorite, is earned value analysis. And this has been I think PMBOK survived on earned value analysis for perhaps the longest many years. But I think this completely misled and contributed to this problem of estimation. Now, earlier, if you all recall, what used to be called as planned value, or what is today known as planned value, many decades back actually used to be called as budgeted cost of work schedule. And what was called as earned value used to be called as budgeted cost of work performed. So by definition, there was something called budget. When PMBOK removed that budget and just called it planned value and earned value, you essentially created, you took the focus off from the term budget, because a budget has a connotation of an estimate. When you take that out, that connotation slowly disappeared. The worst thing, when you called it variance analysis, obviously variance analysis means that you are varying from a commitment that I gave, but I did not give you a commitment. I mean, the developer only gave an estimate. So to take that estimate and then track numbers on it as if it is a commitment was fundamentally unfair. It was fundamentally setting up for a vicious cycle that would negatively feed itself. So both the planned value and the earned value, in my humble opinion, they did an unfair step of removing the focus on the term budget, which was originally in the definition of PMBOK, and I'm talking about many decades back. I'm talking about almost 1990s when I actually studied for my PMI certification. And to top it all, the variance analysis was done based on actual cost. What was actual cost based on? It was based on timesheet data. And we all know how accurate timesheet data is, because we all know that for all practical purposes, timesheet data, even for organizations that used to file it, would be reported as standard 8 hours. But ground reality is it is never 8 hours. It is significantly more. People work a lot more. People spend time over the weekends. But in order to make sure that management reporting looks good, variance analysis is under control, the standard dictate to the team used to be that report time as 8 hours. So while the intent was good, it stays just as an intent, because fact of the matter is it was garbage in, garbage out. Right from the data that used to feed into the estimation basis, that was inaccurate. That inaccurate information fed into future projects, so those numbers were inaccurate. And this cycle just went on and on. And this, unfortunately, was the basis of decades of commitments that IT would make to business based on which projections and forecasts would be made. And very interestingly and very surprisingly, we will say, okay, all projects are out of budget and they are significantly over budget. Well, it is, because the basis of estimation itself was completely inaccurate. So I hope that I've been able to convince to you the real fallacy of this cycle of estimation. And when you speak to your business leaders, you can confidently narrate to them that this is what used to happen. And if you continue with this game, this chain is not going to get broken. So what does Lean Agile talk about? And there are some very significant perspectives that the Lean Agile community talks about, which is invaluable to how we have now thinking and executing. The first one, and I'll go quickly over it because I think everybody who's been in the Lean Agile community understands it. The fact is, you can estimate you can estimate to say one item is bigger than another. You cannot really say the absolute number. So you can say the hammer is heavier than the nail, but there is no way for anybody to quickly and accurately say whether it is a kilogram or a pound or whatever be your unit of measurement. So that is very clear. Now, if we assume that that is the case, then all that we need to do essentially is to take our backlog, our set of small independent testable stories that we have generated, and just do relative sizing. So you take the first card, you put it on a scale, you take the second card, you say, hey, it's smaller or bigger. If it is smaller, you put it to the left. If it is bigger, you put it to the right. And this process continues. So you can do a relative sizing like this of a huge backlog of cards. I would say even like as big as 150, 200 cards, which would be about, let's say, in my experience, that would easily account for about somewhere in the range of 25 to 50% months. You can finish a relative sizing like this in less than 4 to 6 hours. Now, once you do this, you can, just for getting a nomenclature to understand what is one size relative to another, you can give it what in the industry people call it, refer to as t-shirt sizing, or you can convert them into a points and create what is called as story points. Now, I think unfortunately what has happened is that while the thought leaders created this with a lot of valid thinking behind, because as bigger the cards are, the risks and the uncertainty is higher, risks and uncertainty is well modeled by the Fibonacci series, and they use those numbers to be able to model the size of one card versus another. Now, unfortunately, the problem that has crept over the years is that this has started getting equated to effort. So you'll often hear in the language people saying one story point is 8 hours. And I would say even in the scale agile language, when they talk about normalized story points, they have actually inculcated that thought to be able to say that one story point is 8 hours. And that just does the biggest injustice to the whole agile estimation process, because the minute you have seeded that thought, you have immediately converted the relative estimate into an absolute estimate. So all the benefits that were supposed to happen by moving from absolute estimates to relative estimates are completely thrown out of the window the minute you convert a story point into 8 hours. So that's really a strong anti-pattern that if you're doing it, you should try and see how you can get business leaders out of. And truly speaking, you don't need it, and we'll talk about why you don't need it. So the second important perspective is that specifically from the Kanban community and led by many thought leaders like David and Alexei and others, they've established with data that our pattern of work, the completion time that we take, the lead time that we take, is not a Gaussian bell curve distribution. It is a long tail distribution called as a Weibull distribution, where the mean is greater than the median is greater than the mode, which means that you cannot use the average, the mean, as a basis for planning, as if your distribution is a bell curve distribution, because it is not. It's mathematically not. So it's fundamentally a wrong mathematical assumption that we have been very happily using for all our estimation processes for decades together, just assuming that these are bell curve distributions, which is not. And if you look at, I've just taken a snapshot from one of the project team's lead time distribution patterns. It exactly represents it validates the theory that yes, it isn't a bell curve distribution. It is something which has a long fat tail, and the long fat tail clearly distorts our data and our planning if we don't recognize that long fat tail. Perspective 3. So whenever you would have given your estimates to your bosses, I'm sure people would have asked you, how sure are you? Which means in the back of their mind, they always knew that you are giving a gut feel estimate, and the gut feel estimate has a confidence factor. So you would often very subconsciously respond and say, I'm 80% confident, or I'm 90% confident, without obviously recognizing the mathematical basis behind that confidence that you are associating to the estimate that you're making. Now, the important thing to understand is to make a critical difference and ask the question, hey, what level of confidence do you want me to estimate this? Because if you have, let's say, a regulatory requirement, or you want to hit a capability for a Christmas time release, you really you need a very high level of confidence. If it is even a day late, the whole value of the capability is gone. So you need a very high level of confidence if you want something that is so critical to the date of release. Whereas if you are wanting something which is business as usual, it can happen this release or it can happen in the next release, you can really go with a confidence level which is much lesser. You can go with a 75% confidence level or an 85% confidence level. And what that means is that if you actually go ahead and give an 85% confidence level, you'll be able to give a much more aggressive estimate with a clear understanding that, hey, this aggressive estimate has a higher chance of missing it, because the probability is only 85%. There's still a 15% probability of not being able to make this estimate. So the fact that you are able to relate a confidence probability to an estimate immediately turns it around from a commitment and reinforces it to as a budget or an estimate, which was always the true intent. The fourth perspective that I want to highlight, which again comes from the Kanban community, is the concept of flow efficiency. And flow efficiency is nothing but it measures how much time a work item gets worked on as a percentage of the total time. That's all it is. The revelation is that most of our systems report extremely low flow efficiencies, Now, it does not mean that people are idle. It just means that people are continuously swapping from one thing to another, or people are losing focus from one work item to another, and therefore in the process they're not able to finish what they're able to start. Now, this has a very important implication for business agility, because remember, business agility was defined as the ability of the system to rapidly respond to change. So the time dimension is inherently defined in the concept of business agility. If you are not able to deliver it rapidly, even if you have done 90% of the work, it's of no use because it's not gone out to the market. Now, this is a sample, and I again wanted to just show that the theory is actually validated by the data. This is our own development team flow efficiency, and even though you see here the average is between 20 and 30, we know for a fact that the actual flow efficiency is 1/3 of this number, because on average people have 2 to 3 cards easily sitting in their name for various reasons, but they are finishing off one card, they're waiting for the review cycle to get completed, so it is waiting for something else to happen. On the other hand, they're working on something, so people easily have 2 to 3 cards in their name, and therefore the real flow efficiency is actually 1/3 the 20-30% data that we have, which means it's really about, let's say, 10 to 15%, even very optimistically speaking. Now, this is a very high revolution for us, because what that means is, if you are working on an item where your data says it will take 100 days or 100% days is your estimate, you will actually be working on it for only 25% days. The remaining 75% days you'll be waiting. And if this is the case, which is borne by the data, then it makes no sense for us to spend time and hours trying to negotiate whether 25 days is 25 or it should be 20 or it should be 35. It's a complete exercise in futility. Our focus should be to see how can we reduce the 75 days of waiting time and bring it down by, let's say, half, so that even if my 25 days turns out to 40 days of working time and I can deliver it and my waiting time comes down to 30, my cycle time my lead time will still reduce from 100 days to 75 days. So the focus should be on reducing the waste there than to try and figure out whether my 25% days should be 22 or 30 or 32 or whatever the actual number is. So let's quickly recap what we have covered so far. So what we have covered so far is that the estimation that we used to do so far was largely an exercise in futility. It was garbage in, garbage out. It served very little purpose. It is wasteful. It is wasteful because the customer does not value your estimation effort. If you estimate and say something is 10% months or you estimate it as 12% months, the customer could care less whether it's 10 or 12, because the fact of the matter is they are only bothered about the value. When you go and buy a service or buy a product, you are not looking at how much effort goes behind it. You are looking at the outcome and the value that you're going to get out of it. And that's true for anybody buying software from you as well, or using your software. And the new perspectives on estimation is, firstly, relative estimation is accurate. Absolute estimation is extremely inaccurate. The concept of a lead time distribution, which has a fat tail, and therefore planning based on average data, is mathematically and scientifically inaccurate, wrong. Making sure that whenever we are asked for an estimate, we explicitly ask the question that what is the associated confidence number that you want for that estimate. And last but not the least, understanding that we are dealing with low flow efficiency systems. If it just so happens that you're working in a flow efficiency system which had an 80% flow efficiency, then by all means it makes way more sense to focus on the 80% effort and focus on the actual working time and see how could you reduce it. But that's not our world, that's not our case, and therefore at this point of time, till you really reach very high levels of execution and flow maturity, it makes far more sense to focus on reducing wait time than to try and focus on what is the actual work time going to be. So what is the path forward? And there are different scenarios, so we'll talk about it. Now, the first and the very easiest thing that most agile teams understand and are very easily aware of is to use velocity. That, hey, if we were delivering 10 cards a month, if I have to deliver 100 cards, if my backlog is 100 cards, it will take 10 months. It's as simple as that. So that I think everybody understands, but I think there are some critical success factors for this model to work, and I want to spend some time on that. Firstly, you should have the full backlog available if you want to make your projection based on this, because if you don't have the backlog available, you can't make this projection. Now, a lot of the agile coaching and the lean coaching talks about that, hey, break an epic or a theme only when you're closer to picking it up. That concept is absolutely valid if you're working in a flow-based system, continuously taking work item as it goes along, as it comes along to IT. But if you are not in that environment and if you have to make an estimate or a projection for a chunk of work, you do need to use a method like story map and generate the full backlog. Number two, that you need to generate small and independent stories, because if you're not generating small and independent stories, then once again, you're not going to be able to deliver it. So even if you're doing work, nothing is going out, your velocity is going to be showing 0 or almost 0, and therefore the projected date is going to be as high as infinity because you don't have any real velocity data. The most important thing I would highlight is dependencies. I always kind of smile myself, within myself whenever I hear my prospects or customers asking for dependency capability, because the minute you are building dependencies, you're inherently moving from an agile execution model to that same old big bang development model where everything is going to stuck and is going to get stuck at testing cycle, because all those development cards have to come together so that you can get the whole build and get the whole release tested and then ship it out. So if you're having the dependencies, especially work item dependencies, not collaboration dependencies, work item dependencies, then you're setting yourself for actually a lesser or almost no agility. And the last but not the least, which again the whole agile community talks very little about, is using past velocity as a basis for future only works if you have a stable system. If you have a lot of attrition in your team, or if you have a dynamic team size, that logic does not work. You cannot take past data where you had, let's say, 15 people working and now apply it to a future projection where you're going to have 25 people working, or tomorrow you're going to have 8 people working. So just using past data, velocity data, without normalized for velocity is inaccurate. In fact, if you look at our Scrum capability in the Swift Enterprise team, we always associate the velocity data with the team size, because without seeing team size data, if you look at just velocity data independent of team size, you're missing a critical input in your planning process. And again, you're going to go off the track. Now, approach 2, which is based on lead time histograms distribution that we talked about just a few minutes back. So I can obviously predict that, okay, if this is the work item and similar work items have this kind of cycle time distribution, and if my business says that, hey, I'm happy with an 80% confidence number, I can immediately forecast a date based on actual lead time past data histograms, not subjective, no inaccuracy, just the real histogram data which doesn't have any guesses. One important thing, again, stable conditions, because again, if your team dynamics are changing, team skills are changing, team sizes are changing, past velocity or past lead time distribution will not be a great indicator. It will be better than approach 1, because once you start a card, you will finish it. So it's still more valid, but it will still become but it will still reduce its accuracy, because the inherent stability of the team that was used to generate the past data that has changed now. And of course, like I explained before, if you have dependencies, you could be ready and get your work done, but not hit the end of the door, and therefore you'll get stuck. So therefore you'll again this model would fail. So 2 key scenarios. The first one is big bang initiative, right? If you are asked to estimate large projects or large enhancements, then you need to use approach 1. You need to be able to generate the whole backlog, and then use the confidence depending upon whether they want an 80% confidence. Because remember, like we showed you in that chart earlier, there is a best velocity prediction and a worst case velocity prediction, and you will most likely land up somewhere in between. So you still need to validate that what is the confidence percentage that you need to work with. But essentially using past velocity data is the approach where you have to give an estimate for large big bang projects. And remember, we are not talking about a person month effort estimate. What we're talking, or we are talking about that, but differently. All that we're saying is that, hey, our past data says that we can take a 10% team will take 10 will finish 10 cards in a month, And therefore, if you again have a 10% team, if your backlog is 100, it will take 100% months. It's as simple as that. You're not getting into detailed line by line analysis, trying to understand what goes inside it. Because remember, you have generated small independent testable stories, which is the premise of a story map, and you're using as the input to your estimation process now. And last but not the least, if you have a continuous flow of items, like in production support or maintenance tickets, then you use approach 2, which is that you take one item and and you say, okay, if this item I start on day X, it will get done in 40 days from now, because that's what my distribution is. So you know that if one person works on it, which is generally a low WIP system model, a low work in progress system model, if one person works on it, if the lead time distribution is tells you that 80% confidence is 40 days, then you can go ahead and say, hey, it will take 40% days, which is my 80% confidence number. So what you're doing in effect is you are not spending any detailed time in trying and splitting hair about what is in the specific card, what do I need to implement. You know, if somebody is familiar with function point analysis, they would remember we used to understand what is there in the input, what is there in the output, what are the queries that are going to be, what are the external queries, what are the ILFs and the EIFs. You are completely, you've now created an estimation approach which is based on factual past data without looking into the actual granularity of what is inside that work item. The only assumption being, that yes, you have small independent testable cards. And if you don't have if that assumption does not work for you, then very clearly you are not even ready for lean agile execution, because lean agile execution works only with small independent testable work items. You call it stories or whatever, but that's the basic working unit. Now, I want to spend some time with the next 5 minutes on what I think is really a game changer. And that is that whenever you get a question from the business side saying, when can I get it? When will I get this? The flip question to ask them is, when do you need it? Because when you ask them that question, that when do you need it, you're doing two things. You're making them think really of, by when do I really need it? It is not just as soon as possible. So you're really making them think of, when do you need it? And that answer automatically now helps you to think, get back and say, okay, if this is my past velocity, and if this is the time by when you need it, then this is the amount of scope that I can deliver. So even if I had 100 work items, I know that based on what you needed, when you need it, which is, let's say, 3 months from now, I can only deliver 30 work items. And if I can only deliver 30 work items, then let me work with you on the business side to figure out what 30 do you need. Because there's no way that I can deliver what my data shows us will need 10 months and deliver it in 3 months. So it forces a conversation between prioritization and a real business need to be based on your past data, which is a lot more constructive and which has a far greater chance of actually making it happen than making everybody fail and then feel where the delivery teams feels that they have slogged it out and they have still not been able to make their accomplishment. The business side feels unhappy because they've put all the pressure they could, but they still did not get what they want. So this has a very important connotation, which is to ask the question, when do you need it? The second aspect, which is again a game changing, is what we call as demand shaping. Now, most of us, I'm assuming all of us on this call, are in a world where demand is greater than supply, which means that we need more items to be done than what our teams are capable of. There's always more to be done than what we can. I hope all of you are in that state. At least my teams in Digite definitely are. Now, if by chance you know that, let's say, if I have to work on 2 different cards, both have same priority, and I know that if I start on this card, I will finish this on by, let's say, in 3 months, but I really need this in 6 months. I really need this only in June 30th. I don't need this in 3 months. So if I'm in a situation where my forecast date is less than the due date, then I can actually maximize the revenue opportunity potential for the organization by saying, let me start on this later. Let me pick on the other card because this one I can afford to wait for another 3 months. So if by using your lead time distribution data and applying it as a prioritization criteria between two comparable items of similarly equal importance, you can maximize an opportunity potential. If you did not have this insight, you would have in all probability started on the card which was needed in June just because that came first, or business was putting more pressure, or let's say those guys were the more powerful guys in the whole ecosystem. You would have taken up their card, though their due date is only in January, right? And you would have, though their due date is only in June, and you would have lost the opportunity potential on working on the card where the due date is only in April. So you can actually now shape your demand. Now, if it so happens that your forecast date is greater than your due date, then obviously you need to highlight that risk and go back to business and educate to them that, hey, this is the situation. What do we do? Prepare them for that. This is not going to happen, and then figure out a business plan of how to make it happen, or deprioritize and figure out what can be done to be able to expedite this card and take it on a higher priority, whatever it is. But at least it will give you a basis for having a meaningful conversation. So I like to generally talk about a few anti-patterns in most of my talks, and at least the two visible term anti-patterns which I referred to earlier is, at least for teams which are doing supposedly agile execution, is 8-hour story point. The minute you hear 8-hour story point, mentally you can just think and ditch the whole concept that at least agile planning and tracking and execution is not agile. It is absolutely as conventional project management and delivery management used to be. They could still be delivering in small independent work items. They could be still working in sprints. They could still have all the good things on agile testing and agile automation. Great, no problems there. But if it comes to as far as estimation and planning and all the behavioral changes that we expect that teams to take ownership and actually be transparent, you have just killed that and killed that to the T by making sure that you're practicing that 8 hours as a story point. And I've often again been asked about teams trying to compare baseline story points and then compare it against actual story points. It's an absolute disaster, because the minute you try to baseline an actual, again going back to the same vicious cycle where people will start estimating higher. Every layer of the estimation will keep bumping it up. Nobody will trust that. It will again go back, and you have just done the same vicious cycle that we used to be in the whole conventional classic project management. So in closing, let me again repeat that the whole premise of Lean-Agile is to work with small independent work items. I'm sorry, I know I'm sounding this like a record, because I see this as not getting enough focus and people trying to do Agile with all kinds of dependencies and tasks, thinking that just by working in sprints, they will have Agile, and that nothing can be farther away from reality. We talked about estimation is the heart of many planning and execution ills. It is actually at the heart of many management and team behavioral ills as well, because there's so much distrust that gets built when you when something doesn't happen on time, and then the first reaction of management is, hey, but you guys estimated this. And yes, we estimated this, but you can't now nail me because that was an estimate, because you wanted an estimate. But this whole psyche of taking that estimate as a commitment and then doing variance tracking based on that estimate just completely kills the spirit of true and honest collaboration and transparency. We talked about low efficiency systems, and we highlighted the fact that there is more value in looking for opportunities to reduce wait time than to predict and lose time in estimating what is going to be my work time. estimation is fundamentally a waste. No customer benefits by you spending 10 hours on estimate or 20 hours on estimate. And therefore, if you can get away by no estimates, which you can do by t-shirt sizing and simple velocity based tracking, no estimates, or if you can do as minimal estimate for somebody to get peace of mind, the better off you are with. Use past velocity to forecast a big chunk of work that has been broken into small independent work items, or use lead time distributions to forecast one individual work item that you want to forecast and say, when would this get completed? And by the way, you could always say that, hey, is it necessary that lead time is distributions only need to be applied for user stories? Can I apply it to features? Yes, you can. But my experience is that the minute you move from features to epics, you're better off using a story map and past velocity than to use a lead time histogram, because as part of that story execution within the epic, let's say if an epic has 40-50 stories, you don't know which one will get stuck at which point of time or deprioritize or whatever be it is. So if you really want to really use a big bang scope projection estimation model, it's far more accurate and far more quick and fast, almost like, as I said, 4 hours effort for a whole 50% month kind of a job and get it done in that kind of timeline. So you've covered the important things that we wanted to highlight today so that you can actually deliver agility with no estimation or very little estimation effort. You can still do some estimation if you think that it is very hard to convince your business leaders and tell them that, hey, we have no estimates. They will, in most probability, if you don't take them through a whole conversation like this, they will flip off their chair if you tell them that, hey, we will deliver on time without estimates. They will just not buy into that. So you need to give them something. If you need to give them something, use story points, but do not equate it to 8 hours. Keep it relative so that you are not comparing. We have seen teams trying to say, hey, this team is delivering 10 story points per month. This team is delivering 20 story points per month, and therefore concluding that the second team is more double the productivity of the first team. It is so incorrect and so against the basic principles of lean agile thinking to make that conclusion. So whenever you try and give management data, avoid giving data that can lead them to these kind of conclusions. You'll have far better outcomes in that process. So I'd like to end with that. Hopefully I have some time left to be able to take some questions, and I hope that the session was useful. Join us for the subsequent sessions. We'll talk about how to track and how to actually execute and deliver rapidly and in a true lean agile manner. Thanks, Mahesh. Thanks, guys.
Hey, excellent talk, Sudhi, and I think close to heart for a lot of people. Lots of questions from the audience. Let me start with a question at a high level: that if story points are essentially relative sizing of work within a unit, right? A sprint, for example, then is velocity even a valid measure? Because the total amount of story points that you're delivering within a sprint has no correlation from one sprint to the other. So does velocity as a measure and velocity as a way to forecast progress, does that even make sense?
So if you start with the premise that I am getting, let's say, small independent work items, and let's say, what is the definition of small? Let's say small is something that will get done the whole cycle, right? From analysis to completion of full automated testing will get done, let's say, in a week, maximum 2 weeks, whatever is the sprint duration that you have, because typically it is, you want the stories to be completed in a sprint. So if you have a stable system there where you are getting small independent work items, then it does work. It is not highly inaccurate. It does work. Though I would say it's better off to do velocity tracking based on count of cards. So like I said, it's far better to do a velocity saying I can do 10 cards in a month and therefore 100 cards in a year, 100 cards in 10 months, than to say I can do 10 story points in a month and therefore 100 story points in 10 calendar months. So it's far more faster, quicker, and more cheaper, less controversial, lesser waste if you do velocity based on just pure count of cards. But as I said, many business leaders can't just digest the fact that you can actually plan and execute a project without a number in mind. And so if you have to buy some piece from them until you have exhibited success and shown them how to get it done, then by all means use story points, but don't convert it into 8 hours per point.
Okay, so let's take questions, folks. We have got a bunch of questions, so we might run a bit over. Hopefully, many of you will stay and hear the discussion out. So, firstly, of course, there's a question that came in from somebody in the audience, Deepak, and that is my question as well. That how do you get a real answer for by when do you need it? It's a great way to sort of frame a question. But the problem with, and as we know ourselves in our own context also, sales and leadership will say, I need it as soon as possible, or I needed it yesterday, and everything is important. So how do you get realistic answers to that question?
Yeah, so I think, so very, very legit, good question. I actually had thought about covering that point during my talk, but I missed it. So I'm glad that the question was asked. So if business is telling you that I need all the things as soon as possible, it essentially means you have now the liberty to say, okay, that means I am assuming 3 months. So you immediately flip that question and say, okay, so as soon as possible for me is 3 months. Is 3 months good enough? And then again, you'll have, no, I need it 2.5 months, or they'll say yes, whatever be it, or 2 months, or they'll say yes. So you can convert that as soon as possible into a timeline by saying, okay, as soon as possible for me, given past track record is 6 months. Does that work for you? And that will immediately force them to say, no, 6 is too much. Give it to me in 3 months, and there you will have your answer. The other thing is, if you actually are struggling, and Mahesh, and that's how we do, we go back to the business and say, okay, so you guys are saying that these 10 things are all as soon as possible. Now you tell me in which order you want that as soon as possible to be. So you want, is this more important than this, and point number 3 is more important like this. So you make business prioritize between the as soon as possibles, and they will have an answer. And if they're not giving an answer, take it up to you to say, okay, then I will go ahead with what I can do. And you make an assumption. So you say, if they are not willing to prioritize, you say, I will prioritize in the order of 1, 2, 3 based on my judgment. And if you don't change that, then that's going to be our prioritization order.
Yep.
By the way, just to complete that, when do you need it is also often organizations do know when they need it. At least, whenever you're looking for items which have some kind of linkage to an external system date, a regulatory requirement, or a marketing event, or a promotion, anything of that nature, or a customer go live happening, you do have a date in mind. It is not that it's always as soon as possible. But yes, I understand that there are many cases where it is as soon as possible. And the best way is to make your assumption and then have a collaborative discussion with them, so that you flip the as soon as possible into a timeline and then have the conversation with them.
Yeah, and I think as you said, and I think there is a question related to that as well, that there will be multiple conflicting requirements, and so then it is a matter of ranking, doing a rank order to say, okay, give me a rank order, and we will work as per the priority that you define, and you get the flexibility to change your rank order depending on the overall time that we're looking at, so that you are working on the most important stuff at any time.
Actually, Mahesh, in the previous talk, we actually highlighted that how you can have a lot more structured methods. We talked about at least 2 methods in the previous talk. We talked about the red route mechanism, which the Lean UX guys use, and we talked about a risk-based assessment prioritization mechanism, which we use in the Kanban enterprise services planning body of knowledge. And there are fairly meaningful structured methods to be able to prioritize. So I would encourage anybody who's looking for prioritization methods to look at one of those methods, It's far more meaningful to be able to prioritize it that way and in a very collaborative fashion.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Okay, let's take a couple of others. A couple of interesting questions. So one is from Geeta, how to manage dependencies efficiently to avoid wait time. Always a challenge to deal with dependencies.
So if you do have dependencies which are collaboration dependencies, let's take for example, you're working on a feature. That feature has a dependency on let's say a library that an external party is going to give you. Then the best way to do it is not to, and you see in your system that's a very common occurrence. Then the best way is that before you actually take it up in your own execution cycle, you go ahead and cross validate when are they going to be ready. So it's a fairly simple thing that you or fairly. So what you do is you kind of identify, you break your backlog into a couple of stages, and in one of the stages you kind of look at what are the prerequisites for this story card. And then let's say if the prerequisites are three, you need this library, you need some hardware, so you have three such dependencies. When you have the three some dependencies, what you do is in the third stage, let's say 30 days before your planned start date, you send a mail to those guys and get a confirmation that, okay guys, we're going to plan this in 30 days from now. When are you guys going to be ready? If you get to know that, hey, those guys are not going to be ready in another 3 months, clearly there's no point for you to take that card into the execution cycle. So it's worthwhile for you to block that card with the appropriate reason for another 2 months and wait for them so that you are ready for them. So what you can do is do this simple prerequisite analysis within the backlog cycle itself before you push it down to the downstream. There's absolutely no point in getting it started downstream with your development team and then getting stuck because a dependency prerequisite is not in place. And I've written some blogs about it many years back. If you send an email to us, I'll be happy to share the relevant blog with you.
All right. Another interesting question was, how does level of confidence, this is from Karan, how does level of confidence help in improving the estimates of a team? I don't think they're related, but I think they help you have a good conversation. But Sudhi, why don't you go and respond?
The level of confidence is not a reflection of the confidence of the team in delivering the work item. Or it's not like a developer's confidence. All that you're doing is you are making a confidence number based on your systemic execution. So you're saying that, hey, let's say I have a steady execution pattern. So you say that, okay, I have an 80% confidence that I'm going to be delivered in X number of days. But if you have a very volatile system where you see a lot of spikes in the lead time distribution, you see a lot of variation, and it's possible, then obviously you will have your 80% confidence number will be X plus whatever, Y or Z. So therefore, the confidence is a representation of the team's maturity and the environment that you are in, not in an individual developer's confidence of how long it will take them to finish that job. Because they could still be finishing it, but because of the wait time and the systemic issues that your team has, get stuck in some stage where you can't work anymore on it.
Yeah, makes sense. And also, I think the one of the big things about Kanban in particular, I know is that it's a great way. It helps you have conversations, right? And the fact that you bring in an additional dimension of confidence level or confidence factor immediately triggers that thought in the person who's asking the question, when am I going to get this? And you're then able to have a more meaningful conversation based on the past performance data that you have, rather than just giving a number and having to defend that number.
Absolutely.
Okay. Question from Muhammad, and this is a good question for when you don't have a lot of past data. For enterprise teams for working on diverse technology with a mix of youth and experience, how do you think we can make use of historical data for new initiatives, projects for estimation and do demand and capacity planning?
So there are two parts to this problem, Mohammed. One is you obviously have a tough problem to deal with, and let me give the difficult answer, which is that the traditional estimation models would not have solved the problem. So if you have a lot of technology, new technology or disruptive technology at your doorstep, you anyway will not be able to have a good estimation model no matter what you are doing, whether it was the earlier way of using estimation models or the newer models. The only thing that you're doing, and the Lean Agile community recognizes that when you are doing a lot of this kind of disruptive new technology work, or with a lot of new people, things like that, then you work in what's called as spikes. So you essentially say that, okay, I'm going to go into a research and R&D mode for 2 weeks. I'm going to figure out and spend some time in 2 weeks. And at the end of whatever the 2-week period, I'm going to come back to my management team and say, okay, this is what we discovered. This is the level of clarity that we have. These are the open issues. Do we need to do another spike and continue into more research? Or do we need to now start taking can we take the business call to say we continue with this track or we drop off this track? So you keep doing short sprint dipsticks to be able to evaluate and say that, okay, what is it going to take? But you just, there's no way for anybody, whether it was the traditional model or even in an agile model to be, or in the agile estimation model, to be able to say how much effort that it would take. So this is a problem which is a genuine problem. A lot of us deal with that problem because we are all in the technology world, which is continuously throwing newer and newer stuff at us. And the only thing that we do is not to mix that execution model with the drill of day-to-day execution model. So we, at least within Digite, we have carved out a separate team that looks into that kind of completely new technology innovation, or whenever there are new people's, we kind of put them in that kind of an ecosystem where they are not held accountable to a completion of a result at the end of every sprint. But what they're expected to do is to keep giving 2-week dipsticks and say, okay, this is what we researched, this is what we learned, this is the outcome, and this is based on this now, whether we need another sprint or another 2 sprints worth of more research, after which we'll be able to conveniently give in some sense of a projection.
Yep. All right. So coming up to nearly 10 minutes past the hour, so I'm going to just ask the last question here, which is again probably close to our hearts. Question from Brian: have you worked with a customer who really understood earned value management? And if so, how was it successfully used in delivering projects?
Okay, so Brian, I'll tell you that my first almost 15 years of my career was only based on earned value management. And the magic always was in manufacturing data so that we could meet expectations of earned value management. So it's pretty embarrassing to acknowledge this in an open forum. But what we used to do is that we used to, let's say, for example, if we would know that, okay, this is, like I said, an 80% confidence number, we would clearly double the work item and double the number of work items. And we learned the trick that the more line items you can generate, the more estimates you can justify. So if team A is making 100 line items from that requirement document and generating plans based on that, and if we want to generate more estimates, we would simply, our objective in life would be to generate 200 work items. And if you could generate 200 work items, we would be very easily used. The human mind is such that the more items you see that you have to work on, you're able to relate to and say, okay, if there are more items, there's more work, and therefore you will need more effort. That's the de facto method. So once you've created enough buffer and contingency working that way, you can then play the game and actually deliver to earned value metrics. And I'll be upfront in saying that I have done that, and we have worked through that system. In fact, If you're familiar with CCPM model, the CCPM model is completely based on not even actually estimating, not only tracking the outcome, but they would only track the amount of contingency that you had. So they will take the contingency from all the individual work items and put it in a pool, and then the objective of the CCPM tracking model was only to manage the contingency and make sure that you're not falling short of contingency. So anyway, but yes, the answer, long and short, that yes, with some smart data engineering, one could do that.
But to also sort of give an additional dimension to Brian's question, I think I found very few people, very few companies who understood earned value in the way that it was meant to be practiced. Uh, I think we saw variations from people who really understood the difference between a baseline versus a current plan, and then being able to compute earned value based on the difference between the two and the actual progress. And on the other extreme, defense organizations considering treating earned value as purely a number of hours reported by people into the cost of those people as being earned value. So everybody had a very, I mean, there was a wide range of interpretation of what earned value meant. And I don't think there was any uh, real standard being used. So this is at least my experience working in the US.
I think the
Um,
concept is clear, Mahesh, but obviously people have
yeah,
interpreted it in different ways.
yeah,
No question.
yeah. Folks, so we are actually past the time quite a bit, and we will have to close it here. There are a few questions that we did not answer. I'll encourage those people to reach out to us, and in any case, we will make sure to respond to your questions that we have not taken up here. And we will look forward to you connecting with us to ask any further questions that you might have. But irrespective, thank you for joining in today. Thank you for staying this late and listening to this discussion, which I thought was very fascinating. Sudhi, thank you for this second session. I suppose, do you want to talk a little bit about your next session?
So the next session is going to be based on forecasting, right? That once you have essentially estimated this way, and you have made some kind of projection about whether it's going to take you 10 sprints or 12 sprints, how do you now track it, and how do you now ensure that yes, you're able to meet your expectations, and what do you do when that doesn't happen? So we're going to essentially talk about how to do tracking and planning on as far as meeting to your business leaders, because business leaders do need to get a sense of how are you doing in terms of your commitments and your outcomes.
Yeah. And finally, I have one little shameless plug for our products. And a number of the metrics and the techniques that Suri talked about in the session are encapsulated well in our Swift Kanban, Swifties, Swift ESP products. And if you need help from a tooling perspective to get some of these forecasts and talk to your business partners, you're welcome to visit our website and take a look at some of these capabilities that we provide. With that, I'm going to close the webinar. Thank you all once again for joining. Wonderful to have you all here, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thanks, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.